So, what if the absolute fastest way to become a pro at like any physical or technical skill is to intentionally sabotage your own equipment so that you fail more often?
I mean, it sounds like terrible advice, honestly. We are so conditioned to seek out the easiest, most frictionless path to learning something new.
Right.
But neurologically speaking, friction is the exact place where adaptation actually happens.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into a literal masterclass in skill acquisition that's disguised as a jump rope tutorial. We're talking directly to you, the learner out there who might be feeling a bit stuck.
Yeah, maybe you've hit a plateau in a language you're trying to learn, or a physical sport, or even a technical skill at work.
Exactly. And doing the same thing for another 100 hours just isn't moving the needle anymore.
Our source for this deep dive is a transcript from a YouTube video by the channel Jump 15. It's titled 7 Jump Rope Drills to Go from Beginner to Pro.
And the creator makes a rather bold claim here.
Very bold. They claim that after 15 years of experience, implementing these specific drills allowed them to progress from a beginner level to a pro level 10 times faster.
Okay, let's unpack this because to me, this isn't just about skipping rope. It's really a blueprint for hacking the learning curve.
Totally.
Instead of just walking through a list of exercises, we need to look at the distinct phases of learning this creator maps out, starting with the biggest trap almost every single one of us falls into on day one of trying something new.
And that trap is mindless execution. The very first phase of this framework requires what the creator calls a 5-minute checkup.
Okay, so what does that actually look like?
The concept is that before you introduce any speed or any complexity to your practice, you spend the first 5 minutes strictly focused on sensory feedback.
So instead of just grabbing the rope, blasting some music, and jump, which is what literally most people do, you are actively paying attention to the tempo
Right, your tempo, your jump height, where your hands and arms are positioned.
and how the rope actually feels as it moves around you. It's like a pilot's pre-flight checklist.
That's a great analogy.
Instead of going on autopilot, you're doing a deliberate manual systems check. Because if you don't feel the rope, you're flying blind. You can't fix a flaw you can't feel.
What's fascinating here is the underlying neurological shift taking place during those 5 minutes. You're moving from passive execution to active mindfulness.
Which is huge, right?
Absolutely. When you just start an activity mindlessly, your brain automatically relies on whatever default motor patterns you already possess. If your hands are habitually too wide or your posture is slumped, you are actively myelinating the wrong neural pathways.
Wait, myelinated, that's the brain basically laying down the paved road for a habit, right? Like coating a nerve in insulation so the signal travels faster.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. Myelin is a fatty sheath that wraps around your nerve fibers. Every single time you repeat a movement, that sheath gets slightly thicker, making the electrical signal between your brain and your muscles faster and more automatic. But here is the catch: myelin does not judge.
Oh, wow. So it has no idea if your form is good or bad.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It just blindly paves the road you're driving on,
So if you're like jumping with sloppy form for 20 minutes, you are literally reinforcing your bad habits at a cellular level. You're just getting better at doing it poorly.
which is exactly why that initial hyper-awareness is non-negotiable. Engaging your prefrontal cortex, the conscious analytical part of your brain, demands sensory feedback.
It ensures your foundation is actually solid.
Right, and technically correct before you start paving that road. Skipping this step encodes bad habits that will be exponentially harder to break a year from now.
So we've established a mindful baseline, but the brain is pretty stubborn. It likes its comfort zone.
Oh, it loves the comfort zone.
So it needs a compelling reason to adapt and grow. How do we force that adaptation once the baseline is set?
Well, you introduce extreme contrast. The source moves into a phase of absolute maximum speed using 2 specific drills.
Let's break those down.
First, there's a 15-second max jump test using a standard 2-foot jump where the goal is to aim for 30 or more jumps. You have to keep your jumps as close to the ground as possible to minimize airtime.
Got it.
Then, drill 3 shifts to an alternate leg step for 15 seconds to push your maximum absolute speed threshold even further. It tests your wrist sync and your reaction time.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the ultimate goal of pushing that hard isn't actually to get a faster top speed. You aren't doing it just to brag about your score.
No, not at all.
The speed is actually a diagnostic tool, and more importantly, it's a way to manipulate your own perception of time.
Exactly. Going all out exposes the micro cracks in your technique.
Yeah.
Let's say at a slow, comfortable pace, your right wrist rotates just a fraction of a second faster than your left.
A tiny imbalance.
Right. Your brain subconsciously corrects the slack in the rope. You don't even notice the error. But at absolute maximum speed, that tiny asymmetry compounds instantly, the rope loses its shape, and you trip.
You are intentionally breaking your technique to see where the weakest link is hiding. But there's another major benefit here, too.
The sensory adaptation.
Yeah. The source talks about how returning to a normal speed after that frantic 15-second sprint feels, quote, buttery smooth and effortless.
It's a crazy feeling.
It reminds me of like driving on the highway at 80 miles an hour for a long stretch. And then when you take the exit ramp and slow down to 40, it literally feels like you're crawling. You feel like you could just open the door and step out of the car.
That is sensory adaptation at work perfectly. Your brain constantly calibrates its frame of reference based on the most intense recent stimulus.
So it resets what fast feels like.
Exactly. By forcing your nervous system to process the chaotic, high-speed sensory information of that 15-second sprint, you are effectively ramping up your neural processing speed.
Right.
When you drop back down to a normal pace, your brain suddenly has excess processing capacity.
Everything feels like it's happening in slow motion because your brain is overclocked for a threat level that is no longer there.
It's a massive hack for anyone trying to learn a fast-paced skill.
Whether that is playing a really complex piece on the guitar or, I don't know, learning to return a fast tennis serve, overclock the brain briefly, then return to your target pace.
Right. It makes the target pace feel manageable, giving your prefrontal cortex the breathing room to focus on technique again.
Okay, so we have our mindful baseline, and we've used maximum speed as a diagnostic tool. But short bursts of speed only test your skills under ideal high-energy conditions.
That's true. They don't test endurance.
Right. So the creator then transitions into a new phase, drill 4, by stretching that intense 15-second window into a grueling 30 to 60-second sprint.
This introduces a critical new variable into the learning equation: physiological and cognitive load, specifically fatigue.
Because things fall apart when you're tired.
Exactly. The source notes that as fatigue sets in, form naturally degrades, which leads to tripping up. The logic is that getting comfortable at high speeds while you are exhausted builds what they call max speed stamina.
So what does this all mean for you? If you only ever practice a skill when you are completely fresh and energized, are you really mastering the skill, or are you just mastering the absolute easiest version of it?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you're only mastering it under ideal conditions, which, let's face it, rarely exist in the real world.
Yeah, almost never.
Training under fatigue forces a crucial handoff in the brain. When you are fresh, you can force your body to use perfect technique through sheer conscious willpower.
The prefrontal cortex is basically micromanaging every single muscle at that point.
But as oxygen levels drop and muscles begin to burn during that 60-second sprint, your prefrontal cortex taps out. It literally does not have the energy resources to micromanage the movement anymore.
It's too exhausted.
Right. That is when the basal ganglia has to take over the workload.
Okay, wait, I need an ELI 5 explain. Like, I'm 5 on the basal ganglia. Is that basically the brain's autopilot system?
Essentially, yes. The basal ganglia is a group of structures deep within the brain responsible for storing and executing your automated subconscious routines.
Like the stuff you don't even think about.
Exactly. You don't have to think about tying your shoes or riding a bike because the basal ganglia runs those programs. The transition of a complex skill from the conscious prefrontal cortex to the subconscious basal ganglia is the literal biological definition of mastery.
So if your jump rep technique completely falls apart the second you get tired, it means the basal ganglia doesn't actually have the blueprint yet.
Right. It means you haven't mastered it.
Yeah.
You were just faking it with intense temporary focus.
Wow. Pushing through fatigue forces the brain to encode those motor patterns deeper because the conscious mind literally can't hold on anymore.
The movement has to become autonomic or you fail.
Pushing through fatigue is a bit of a brute force method, though. You're just demanding more from a tired system.
It is, yeah.
But the next phase the creator introduces, drill 5, is much more elegant. They use a technical workaround to break through progress plateaus.
This is one of my favorite parts.
They intentionally short the jump rope by tying an extra knot or two in the cable and practicing with it that way for 10 to 15 minutes.
They refer to it as their secret weapon, and from a neurological standpoint, it is incredibly potent.
I do have to push back on this, though. Wait, making the practice harder by intentionally using the wrong size equipment, it sounds deeply counterintuitive.
It does sound a bit backwards at first.
Like, if I want to become a faster typist, Practicing on a keyboard where the keys are intentionally placed too close together wouldn't make me better. It would just mess up my special awareness and create bad habits when I return to a normal keyboard.
That's a valid concern, and it's why the type of constraint you use matters immensely. Your keyboard example introduces an incorrect spatial map,
Okay.
but shortening the jump rope introduces a constraint-led approach to learning. It doesn't change the map of the movement, it simply restricts your margin for error.
I'm listening. How does restricting the margin for error actually teach the body anything?
Think about a standard length rope. If your hands drift a few inches away from your hips, the rope is long enough that it still clears your feet.
You still complete the jump.
Right. Your brain registers a successful jump, even though the movement was inefficient and sloppy.
Oh, I see. You're getting away with it. You don't realize you're making a mistake because you didn't get punished for it.
Exactly. But when you add those knots, you remove all that excess slack. If your hands drift even a single millimeter, the rope catches and you trip.
And the nervous system hates failing.
It really does. So without you even having to consciously command it, your body self-organizes. To avoid tripping, it naturally tucks the elbows in tighter, it minimizes unnecessary shoulder movement, and it makes the wrist rotations incredibly tight and precise.
It is forced efficiency. The environment dictates the perfection rather than your own willpower.
Yes.
And then when you remove the constraint, when you untie those knots, the source says you feel like you have all the room in the world.
They specifically note it's great for mastering complex moves, too.
Like the crisscross, because the short rope forces an exaggerated crossing motion.
Because your brain retains that hyper-efficient, self-organized motor pattern, but suddenly the physical boundaries are expanded back to normal. The task suddenly feels effortless.
I see how this applies far beyond physical skills, too. Like, if you are a writer who struggles with rambling and getting to the point, restricting your word count to 500 words is a knotted rope.
Oh, that's a great example.
Or if you're a graphic designer who relies on flashy effects to hide a weak layout, limiting your color palette to strictly black and white is a knotted rope. The constraint forces the brain to discard all its inefficient crutches.
You strip away the excess slack, so you have no choice but to master the core mechanics. It forces you to solve the problem with pure technique rather than relying on excess resources.
So we've established the mindful baseline to avoid bad habits. We've used contrast speed as a diagnostic tool. We've tested our subconscious mastery through fatigue. And we've forced structural efficiency with artificial constraints.
The mechanics are now locked in.
The final phase from the source, drills 6 and 7, moves away from basic jumping entirely and focuses on advanced flow, transitioning from 1D to 3D.
They suggest starting with side swings, specifically a combo they call the side-side-under, to break out of that single plane of motion.
Because jumping straight up and down is easy. It is strictly one-dimensional.
Right.
The source notes that shifting to 3D movement increases overall athleticism, testing your timing, your rhythm, and your balance.
They actually tease that there are 4 basic 3D skills to start with, though they keep the exact specifics a bit of a mystery, probably to drive traffic to their other videos.
Yeah, classic YouTube move. But the specific tricks don't matter as much as the core concept. We are breaking out of a rigid, linear track.
This raises an important question about how we approach our own practice in literally any field. How often do we get stuck in one-dimensional routines in our training or our work?
We drill the exact same scenario, facing the exact same direction, under the exact same conditions every single day.
We memorize the answers to the practice test, but we don't actually learn the broader subject.
If jumping up and down is just playing a 2D side-scrolling video game, adding side swings and 3D movement turns it into a fully open-world experience.
I love that. And the real world does not operate on a single axis. Moving into 3 dimensions, changing your orientation, moving laterally, managing momentum from different angles, imposes a completely different cognitive load.
It's like learning to walk a tightrope on solid ground in a quiet gym versus learning to do it outside during an earthquake.
A bit extreme, but yes.
On solid ground, you only have to manage where your feet are landing. It's a closed, predictable system. But in the earthquake, your brain has to constantly recalculate a violently shifting environment.
That real-time recalculation is the absolute key to flow. You are no longer just maintaining a static rhythm, you are integrating spatial awareness and dynamic weight shifting.
It's adaptability.
Taking a skill from a rigid robotic motion into fluid, adaptable athleticism means your brain can handle unexpected variables without the basal ganglia dropping the ball.
When you can execute a skill smoothly while your environment or your orientation is changing, You have officially transitioned from a technician to a true pro. Let's recap this entire blueprint for you, the learner. We started with the intentional 5-minute checkup, turning off the autopilot so we don't myelinate bad habits.
We use the contrast of absolute max speed to overclock our brains and slow down our perception of reality.
We trained through the breakdown of fatigue to ensure our subconscious basal ganglia actually owned the skill rather than just our conscious willpower holding it together.
Then we use the knotted rope to enforce a constraint-led approach, removing the slack so the body self-organizes into perfect efficiency.
And finally, we broke out of the 1D robotic routine into a 3D adaptable flow. While this source was explicitly about jump roping, these phases are a universal blueprint.
They really are.
You can apply baseline mindfulness, contrast, stress testing, and constraints to learning a new coding language, mastering a sales pitch, or improving your public speaking. The underlying mechanics of human adaptation do not change.
They don't. And that brings us right back to the power of that constraint-led approach.
Yeah.
If adding a literal knot to a jump rope forces your nervous system to be more precise, pruning away all your sloppy, inefficient movements.
What is the metaphorical knot you could temporarily tie in your own daily work, study, or fitness routine tomorrow to force your next breakthrough? Give yourself less room for error and see how quickly your brain adapts to the challenge. Keep pushing those boundaries, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.